In this episode of the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast, we are going to discuss the 2024 NCAA tournament. The brackets are out, and this is a lot of people's favorite time of the year. So that's why Leif Thulin is on to talk about everything related to the NCAA tournament and how it could impact the 2024 NBA draft. Stay tuned. Big shout out to each and every person that has made the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Rafael Barlowe, the director of scouting for NBA Big Board and the founder of NBA Draft Junkies. And my co-host for the day is Leif Thulin, the guy that watches more college basketball than anyone else. So this is his time to shine. This is where all the hours and hours and hours upon hours of games that he watches. Now he's the expert on the NCAA tournament. But before we get into this episode, I want to let you know that it is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs, because LinkedIn Jobs helps you find qualified candidates that you want to talk to. It helps you find them faster. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And if you're not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe, like, share, comment. Make sure you click the bell so you can be notified every time we post, because we are your source for NBA draft content 5 days a week, or at least 20 times a month. All right. Selection Sunday has came and went. First of all, let's just talk about the overall selections. What was the biggest shocker in your opinion, or just your overall thoughts on how the bracket shaped out?
Well, I thought UConn kind of got a rough draw of things. As the number one overall seed, you typically don't want to play a team that just made the Final Four, even though FAU is probably not deserving of that 8 seed. They're a dangerous team because they have the experience. They have players that have a high pedigree. And then even if Northwestern were to win that 8-9 game, Boo Bowie's a guy who's a All-American. He's at least an All-Big Ten first-team guy, potential All-American. Those are dangerous ones. But what really bothered me is you get San Diego State and Auburn at 4 and 5. I think Auburn has a case to be the top 3. If you were to look at theirs, the 1 and 2 seeds were pretty much locked up. Auburn won the SEC, which was either the best or the second best league in college basketball. They won all their tournament games convincingly, and they're the worst 4. That make sense to me. So I feel badly for Auburn and UConn because they have to play one another. And also Auburn playing San Diego State, that's no treat at all, because that's a physical war right there.
Yeah. What were your thoughts about the Big West overall as far as their teams in the tournament?
The Mountain West,
the Mountain West, I'm sorry.
The Mountain West getting 6, I think, was appropriate. I thought they were underseeded, actually. The Mountain West top seed was San Diego State, which made sense. That's what I would have predicted. But then the number 1 seed, Utah State, got a lower seed than I think they were anticipating. They got an 8 seed, and they were awarded with a clash with TCU, which was not going to be very easy. And then you had a few teams make the first 4 games, which I know is making the tournament, but Colorado State and Boise State being 10 seeds in the first 4, where Colorado State plays Virginia and Boise State plays Colorado. I don't think that's necessarily representative of how good the league was, because they have 3 teams that are seeded 10th. Nevada is an at-large. They're one of the last buys. Boise State and Colorado State both are playing in the first 4. And then you have in New Mexico, who only got in, according to the guy who came in, who was the director of the committee, said, oh, New Mexico was the last bid thief, not an at-large, not a team that would have made it anyway. They were a bid thief, and they only got in because they won their conference tournament. So I felt like they got a little bit slighted, but it was good to see all 6 of them make it, because I think they were deserving of it.
Does that replace the Pac-12 as the next? I mean, are we going to be talking about next year Power 6? Does that include that conference?
I think it will be kind of regarded as a power like 6.5. I think they're still shunned off a little bit, so I guess it'll be 5.5 next year. I think they're still shunned off a little bit, but at least, I mean, they had more bids than the ACC. The ACC got 5 with an with an automatic qualifier being given to NC State out of nowhere, winning 5 games in 5 days. They had more than a few other conferences. So, I I mean, the Big East has a 1 seed, a 2 seed, and a 3 seed, but that was it. Like St. John's didn't make it, which is notable with Patino. Seton Hall didn't make it despite having wins against Marquette and UConn. And then you had Providence and Devin Carter get left out, which I think was I expected that one, but the other two I expected to make it.
Yeah, and this is why Leaf is the guy. Watches more college basketball than anyone else, and he is just spitting out these facts. Speaking of Providence, is Devin Carter like the highest rated prospect on your list of prospects who's was basically snubbed?
I would say he and Isaiah Collier lead that.
But
I don't
Collier
think
wasn't
Collier
snubbed
wasn't
though.
snubbed.
Yeah.
I just wanted to preface that he was one of the other guys before people were saying, "Oh, you forgot an obvious one." But of the people that had a
On the
chance to make
bubble.
the
Yeah.
tournament on the bubble, I would say Carter was my top guy that got left out. I mean, there's a few other guys that you could make an argument, oh, their team had a chance, but of the ones that truly had a chance, if Providence had been able to beat Marquette in the Big East semifinal, I think that they would have made it. And so that's as close as you're going to get onto the bubble. So Devin Carter, I wonder if the Providence accepts an NIT bid, and Carter seems like that type of guy who would play. And I think he could further improve his stock just because he's one of those guys who's risen based on performance rather than previous accolades. He's a hard worker, one of the most driven players and most integral to his team's success.
Would you say he's the most improved prospect as far as guys that were? I mean, I guess you can make a case for like some of the seniors, but as far as guys that stayed at the same school that just kind of blew up out of nowhere, I've seen one mock. Well, I think it was Bleacher Report that had him a lottery pick. Would you say outside of like Dalton Connect and maybe even Hunter Salas, who we'll talk about in a second, was he the most improved player as far as NBA prospect?
Yeah, I think Connect would be the one, but right behind him would be Devin Carter. Devin Carter last year was someone that college basketball fans were like, "Oh, I like that guy. He's a hard worker on an 11 seeded Providence," but he was second on his own team in terms of guys you thought of NBA prospects. Like Bryce Hopkins was the guy you would think of. And they retooled their roster this year. Josh Oduro was the second best player because Hopkins got hurt.
Yeah.
And after Hopkins got hurt, Devin Carter became this monster and he carried the team to what almost making the tournament on a team that wasn't all that talented, that lost talent because they lost their head coach and Ed Cooley. They brought in Kim English. Kim English had to bring back players, brought in a talented freshman in Garway Dual, and the rest of the team was made up of mid-major transfers transferring up to the Big East. And Devin Carter, in a larger workload, typically your efficiency goes down. You kind of score, you're labeled as a bit of a chucker, and your team gets worse. Well, he made them basically the same as they were last year, and his numbers got better in every category, and his effort and defense stayed the same. So I was really impressed by Devin Carter, and I think he's a top 20 pick.
Especially the shooting. Like the shooting was to me the biggest jump that improved his draft stock. I mean, we knew he could defend, we knew he had the intangibles, but the concern was could he knock down shots? And he proved this year he can knock down shots. And then we talked about Salas in the last episode. It's just crazy. Like they beat Duke and then they lose 3 games in a row and then they just never recover. I felt like they were a bubble team. I actually talked to a former coach a couple days ago, and he was like, "Oh man, they're going to get in," and so I was kind of a little shocked that they didn't make it. But so you have 2 guys who I think in Salas and Carter, whose teams are on the bubble, didn't make it, and then you add them along with like Isaiah Collier and Kel'el Ware of guys that I think are going to be first round picks that are not playing in the NCAA tournament. Then you throw in the international guys, and it's like how many? Well, this draft class is so wide open, but it's like how many legit first round picks are actually playing in this tournament. All right, when we return, we're going to talk a little bit more about the NCAA tournament, and I'm going to ask Leif, who does he believe could be his Dante DiVincenzo, the guy that I don't want to say comes out of nowhere, but rides a strong NCAA tournament ride into the first round of the NBA draft. But before we get into that, let's talk about LinkedIn. Why? Because LinkedIn is our sponsor for today. But if you are a small business and you are hiring, you're looking to find quality professionals that fit the right role. Just like when you're the GM of an NBA team or a college coach, It's all about fit and finding the right fit. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, because LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. And LinkedIn is just not your average job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than a billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all of that while making the process easy and intuitive. And hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates in your pool. Matter of fact, 80% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. And LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and they may not have the time or the resources to hire. And that is why LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. So you can post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That is linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. As you know, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24 hours a day, 7 days a week streaming channel, which is called Locked On Sports Today. So, baseball. And if you're a baseball fan, mark your calendar for March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern for the best Major League Baseball season preview, which is coming exclusively to Locked On Sports Today. So check it out, March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern. Be the first to get local insights from Major League Baseball local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Find it on March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern on Locked On Sports Today streaming channel, which is on YouTube, and it is free on the Amazon Fire TV channels app. All right, second segment. This is Rafael Barlowe with Leif Thulin, the guy that watches more college basketball than anyone else. My go-to guy when it comes to just overall college basketball. I mean, Leif watches the Power Six conferences, the mid-majors, lives in Utah, but he watches a lot of Virginia basketball for some reason. That just
I,
shows you how.
I didn't watch that much this year because it was painful. But that said, if you want a subtle boast here, I watched every single game of the Mountain West tournament this year, like legitimately every single one.
All
So,
right, here's a question for you. Did you
yeah,
watch Stanford this year?
of course I did. That's my go-to team right there.
All right, quick
Terrible,
thoughts.
painful,
EC
but
Kane and Carlisle is just entered the transfer portal. What are your thoughts on that, real fast?
oh, that just broke my heart because I hadn't seen it yet.
Yeah, I
But that
literally just saw it before we got.
that does not shock me because we lost our coach, which I think is a good thing. But the good thing about Jared Hass, if there is a redeeming quality, it was that he recruited well. He had Zaire Williams, Tyrell Terry, neither of whom have really worked out that well in the NBA. Harrison Ingram, who's playing very well for North Carolina. A lot of these guys that you're saying, oh, those guys are veterans that are playing well, have relocated from Stanford and achieved, or they've left and had one and dones, which is hard to have at Stanford. So he recruited well. That's his redeeming quality. I don't think he was a good game coach, but that doesn't stun me. It does hurt though. You broke the news live to me right there.
Sorry, I apologize for that. All right, let's talk about who could be this year's Dante DiVincenzo, the guy that just has a strong tournament run. It pushes him into the first round of the NCAA. I'm sorry, the first round of the NBA draft. Just off the top of your head, name a few candidates.
Yeah, I think the way you have to look at this is what teams can make enough of an impact in the tournament to have a streak of games rather than just one game. So you have to look at some teams that you think can make it to the later stages. So if you were to look at some of those top seeds, I think you can make a case for a guy like Harrison Ingram. Like I mentioned, he can impact himself, but not to the way DiVincenzo did. You could look at Pella Larson from Arizona. Should they
You
make an
like
Elite
him?
Eight or
One
further?
of one of the
I
guys you've
liked
been liking him. You've been
I
liking him for a
liked him
while.
at the start of the year a lot. I've cooled off a little bit, but I do think with a good run and he shoots well and he kind of dispels some of those notions. Oh, he scores, but he's not a focal point. Well, if he scores well and he shows the value, because I think he's the most valuable player on that team for Arizona. Caleb Love won the most outstanding player of the Pac-12 or the Pac-12 player of the year, but I think Pella Larson's the better NBA prospect. He might be the most valuable player on that team. He could prove it there. I think you could look at Connect or Shireman or maybe Trey Alexander for coming out to maybe get to the Elite Eight from that bottom side of the bracket on the right hand side, if you're looking at it from that direction, or the Midwest if you prefer the regionality. Those type of guys that carry a large load for their team and then they can thrive doing it in high pressure situations. One guy that I think would have really impacted his career differently is Johnny Juzang a few years ago. They made the Final Four. He elected to come back to UCLA, then sprained his ankle, and UCLA didn't make it as far in the tournament, and he hindered his draft stock. I think he would have been a first round pick for better or for worse had he came out. So it's all about timing. And then if I'm just going to go to the last side, I think Cam Jones would be my last guy. He's not quite as high on scouting reports or draft reports because he's not even a first team or a second team All Big East scout, which I think is a travesty. So I'm just going to
Yeah.
say that as a
Did
college
you see his
basketball
comment?
aside.
Did you
Oh
see his
yeah,
comment?
no, and he was
Not
right.
safe for work.
Yeah, no, I can't say it, but he was right. And everyone knew it. Like you looked at any of the pundits who talked about that. There's no way Dennis Jenkins from St. John's is better than Cam Jones. No way. And I could go on, but I think he's a guy who could, especially with Tyler Kolek being limited, he is going to suit up and play with an oblique injury. I think Cam Jones could really improve his stock. And then, of course, the Kentucky guards could have moments that improve, but they're well-known commodities. So I don't think it's quite the way DiVincenzo went from a second rounder, probably going to return to school, to the 17th overall pick.
All right, let's touch on Kentucky. So Dillingham and Shepard, I think are locks. I even think they're locks for the lottery right now. But can DJ Wagner and Justin Edwards have a Dante DiVincenzo type run to the regain their position where they were expected to be at the beginning of the year?
I don't think Wagner can. I think Edwards could.
Okay.
Edwards has come on very strong. And I told you this both on camera and off, that I watched the blue and white game at the beginning of the year with Kentucky, and I was like, man, I just don't see it at all. He's not dribbling. He doesn't shoot it well. And then he struggled to start the year. He's talked about going to improve the mentals and just kind of be more positive as a lot of the pressure was getting to him. He talked about Reed Sheppard helping that development. Well, Kentucky's surge has coincided with him playing better, him spacing the floor, him getting more minutes, and that all comes to confidence. Well, coincidence? I think not. Kentucky's played better because one of their most athletic and versatile pieces has played better. So I think he's got a chance should Kentucky make a run. Obviously, defensively, Kentucky really struggles, and he's not going to be the focal point. But nor was DiVincenzo. DiVincenzo was a sixth man. Everyone forgets this because he's a prominent player on big teams in the past couple of years, the Warriors, the Knicks, the Bucks, teams that have competed and had chances to win. But he was a sixth man on that team, and he shined really brightly because he benefited from the attention others got. I think Edwards will do the same type of thing should Kentucky make a run.
What about, like, you talked about Wagner? You don't think he can? I mean, like, what does he do next year? Does he come back to school? Like, what do you think is the outcome for him? Because he can't have a first round grade at this point. The shot just doesn't look good. Like the game I watched, who they played? Texas A&M. They weren't even guarding him. Like they were leaving him wide open. And he just seems to really struggle if he's not dominating the ball. Like, I mean, his bread and butter is getting to the basket, but when he's off the ball and he has to shoot, he really struggles. Like, what do you think is the next step for him? Or do you think that he can play himself into getting drafted? I mean, I think he may get drafted. I mean, he has a strong agency behind him. He has the high school resume, but I think if you just went off of his performance this season, he's not one of the top 58 players.
Yeah, I would come back to schools, particularly because the NIL. He's got a big family name, three generations of talented players, McDonald's All-Americans, probably NBA players once he declares. But go back to Kentucky, play again next year. Calipari is not gonna all of a sudden be like, oh, this guy's not talented enough for me. That's not the issue. He just doesn't fit in, or nor is he as good as the players that they have in their backcourt. Like, and that happens. Like, I don't think it's necessarily too much of a critique to put on someone that say he's not as good as Rob Dillingham, who I value as a top 5 talent in this class, and Reed
Mhm.
Sheppard, who by some people who are in our profession of draft evaluation have number one. I don't have him number one, but if there's a case to be made that one of your teammates can go number one, it's not that much of a disparaging thing to say, oh, you're not as good as your teammates, and
Yeah.
those guys should play more. Like, that's the way I view it. I think he should go back to school.
Yeah. I mean, it's like when you go to Kentucky or even Duke, especially Duke in a sense. I think there's a lot of pressure on some of the guys on their roster to perform well in the NCAA tournament and get out because the class that they brought in is strong. It's really strong. And it's like if you're Mark Mitchell, what do you do? That's a
You
question
prob
for you.
you, you probably you probably go to the NBA uh because I don't see him transferring. Or you maybe say, well, I'll come off the bench and be a mentor and win a championship. But I just don't think you do that like at this level. That would be the pitch to keep him there. And the NIL would be plenty good because Duke's got plenty of money. So I expect him to enter the draft this year, and I don't think he'll get picked. He just doesn't shoot it well enough. He's not big enough to be a four. Um, but yeah, no, you're making a strong point. I think Kentucky's got less of the issue just because Wagner is such an on-ball talent. He's working with two guys that are more talented in the same class as him.
Yeah, yeah. I think for him, because of the buzz and the hype that he had coming in, people are going to see it as a disappointment if he does return to school. But I know, like at Kentucky, Calipari is known for recruiting your replacement. I had a good friend of mine that told me that he played for him at Memphis, and he said that when Derrick Rose wanted to come back, Cal was like, "No, I ripped your scholarship up. Your replacement is on the way." Now, Derrick Rose is going to be the number one pick. DJ Wagner's situation is totally different, but I do think that when you go to some of those powerhouse schools that are known for churning out one and dones, you have to get in and out because there's a chance that the guy that is coming in to to replace you could be better than you. And now you're in an even more weird situation. All right, when we return, I have a few more questions and I want to ask Leif, let's go best case scenario. What are some of the matchups featuring prospects that we could see in this NCAA tournament? Stay tuned. Let's talk about our new sponsor, Stitch Fix. You know that instant confidence boost you get from an outfit that makes you look really good. And like Deion Sanders says, when you look good, you play good, feel good. I'm paraphrasing here, but that's what you get when you try Stitch Fix. Because with Stitch Fix, you get a stylist who understands your style, your size, and your budget, and they do all the shopping for you. It is the easiest way to update your wardrobe this season. A stylist will help you find new on-trend favorites that work for you and just for you. All you have to do is give your stylist your size, your style, and your budget preferences, and you get boxes whenever you want without a subscription required. And they send 5 just for you pieces plus outfit recommendations and pro styling advice. You keep what works and you can send back the rest. Your stylist will always send you the right pieces and the fit will be on point. It's like they have style ESP. I don't know how they do it. They just do it. Stitch Fix makes it so easy. If you don't like the shop, you can save time and effort. Plus, get the outfits that make you look good and feel good. And if you don't love something, you just send it right back. Shipping, returns, and exchanges are always free. Style that makes you feel as good as you look. Get started today at stitchfix.com/locked on. That is stitchfix.com/locked on. Again, stitchfix.com/locked on. All right, last segment. Let's talk about some potential matchups that we could see down the line. Part of me is like, this is part NBA draft enthusiast, and the other part is like, this is just the basketball fan of me that wants to see these players match up. What are a few names and games that come to mind?
My personal favorite one is one we've actually talked about comparing these two players in terms of their NBA roles, but I think it'd be a thrilling matchup between what I think will both be All-Americans, and that's Baylor Shireman of Creighton, who's a 3 seed against Dalton Connect of Tennessee, who's a 2 seed, so that would be a Sweet 16 matchup. Obviously, a lot of work to get there for both teams, but
Yeah.
it's feasible. I would be thrilled to see them both take on the defensive challenge. I think it's far more likely that Shireman guards Connect than it is Connect guarding Shireman, but those teams match up very differently. They both are very relied upon to score. And so it'd be very interesting to see which one of those guys has the better individual game because I think it would boost their stock tremendously as that's the type of matchup that people look at and be like, wow, he won the individual matchup between a guy we have higher. Maybe let's move him up. In the case of Shireman, should he win that matchup against Connect? I'm really excited for that one. I think there's a lot of ones on that side of the bracket where you also have a Kentucky and a Marquette matchup where
Marquette.
it's just
Yeah.
it's backcourts galore right there. You've got all the guards we've talked about for Kentucky with Cam Jones and Tyler Kolek, and I think those two guys are pretty underrated. They're both upperclassmen, so they're less talked about in terms of the draft circles. But Kolek was the reigning Big East Player of the Year, another Big East first teamer. Could have had the Big East Player of the Year if Devin Carter didn't have an awesome year and Kolek didn't get hurt at the end of the year.
Yep.
And then you got two guys that are in the top 10 for Kentucky.
Yeah, and then you also have Iguodaro against, I mean, whichever Kentucky big man Cal decides to play, like Oyenso or maybe Aaron Bradshaw and Ivisic. I mean, I think that would be like a great matchup. But of course, like you said, it's the NCAA tournament. There is a strong chance that it doesn't happen because there's always upsets. What are some other potential matchups featuring NBA prospects or just teams that you would like to see?
There's a couple that I think there's a lot of tests for. Should Duke advance to play Houston in the Sweet 16? I think Filipowski would said a lot about if he could play well against the physicality of Houston. I'd be skeptical. I've been on record saying I'm fairly low on Filipowski compared to a lot of others. I think that if you saw Terrence Shannon Jr. in the Big Ten tournament, he would raise some eyes because he scored 28
102
points.
points.
Yeah, he scored 28, 40, and 34 in 3 consecutive games, and against
Yeah.
Jackson Robinson and BYU in the second round, should that occur. That's a guy from BYU and Jackson Robinson that's a really good shooter, and he has kind of been the main prospect allure for BYU, and that's a team that's been hardened by playing in the Big 12. They would probably guard each other. So that would be interesting as well on a less notorious scale as opposed to Kentucky and Marquette, who get plenty of notoriety.
Yeah, I want to talk about those two real fast. Terrence Shannon Jr. has had a phenomenal season, like All-American season. Just based off of the numbers, he's a lock to be a first round pick. Now, I don't always want to talk about the negatives, but I've spoken to an NBA representative, and he's like, "There's not a chance he goes first round with this case over his head." And so he has a rape case that I think the court date is set for like May 10th or something like that. I even read that a couple of the Kansas players are supposed to like speak on his behalf, or I don't want to dig too deep into that, but I have been told that as long as this is over his head, he's not going to be a first round pick, no matter how well he plays. Now, I heard this maybe 2 weeks ago. And so maybe the feeling has changed a little bit based off of, 102 points in 3 games. So, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with him. Jackson Robinson is a guy that, like, I mean, calling him a tease is a strong word, but there are times when you watch him play and you're like, this dude is top 20 player or top 20 prospect. And then there are times where he just kind of disappears. What are your overall thoughts on Jackson Robinson?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think he's a little more flash than substance in the sense that he's a really good shooter, but it's very well scripted. He doesn't create much. He looks like he's a good athlete in the sense that he's kind of wiry and he gets back cuts and finishes with dunks, or he comes off pin downs and hits threes. Like it looks good. But if you watch BYU play, they play a very methodical offense that is orchestrated through the 5 man, and he's kind of the recipient of a lot of passes. And that's not to say that's a knock, but you typically, when you associate, oh, this guy is playing for a team and he scores well, you wouldn't think of him as a recipient scorer as opposed to someone who has the ball in his hands. Like if you were to compare he and Shannon, I know they're different like popularity levels of players because Shannon's been on the radar for 5 years, and frankly I've been low on him for 4 of them, and this year he's really impressed me with some of his advancements as a shooter and with the ball in his hands. um, you would say that Shannon's a far better athlete to a point where it's almost detrimental he gets out of control, but you want to have that level of athleticism, and Jackson Robinson is mostly a standstill shooter, and the athleticism is not terribly functional in my opinion.
But he shows flashes. Like he shows glimpses of being more than just a spot up shooter. Like it's not consistent, but it's not like he's a guy that you say that's all he can do. Like there are glimpses. And then he's young. I mean, not as far as experience in a sense. I mean, he's what, like a 21-year-old senior. If I used to know it, but I want to say he was like younger than Brandon Miller, if I'm not mistaken. And Brandon Miller would be a sophomore, and Robinson is a senior, but he went to school early. But anyway, I mean, I think he's really talented. He is someone that had like a significant buzz early in the season. Then it kind of faded. And then it's like he's in this range of, is he a lock to be drafted this year? Because this class is so deep with guys that are very similar as far as like skill set or at least draft range. Do you think he's a top 60 or well, it's only going to be 58 picks, but do you think he's a lock to be drafted?
I would hesitate to say lock, but I do think he's got a good chance just because of how coveted shooting is, and he's one of the better pure true shooters in this class. There's a lot of guys who have athleticism or younger, and they have potential. Well, he's done it on a good team in a good league, and the traits that you want to bet on right now are no longer as much in athleticism as times past, where you used to bet like, oh, this guy's going to become a great defender, because shooting is so coveted that even great athletes who are great defenders or could be great defenders are hard to play at times if they cannot shoot. So I think the fact that he's got tools outside of just being a good shooter and the shooting is very real allows him a real chance to get selected. But I wouldn't say lock just because those type of things become tenuous, and you can prefer to be picked to not be picked, and so you can choose your location. So I think he deserves to be within those top 58 though.
He is one of the players that I believe a strong NCAA tournament or a terrible NCAA tournament could be the difference between first round and two-way contract. I think if BYU makes a run and he's averaging 15 points a game and shooting 37, 38% from three over 3 games or so like that, could really help him, especially if it's like a big game or if he just plays terrible. I think that can really jeopardize his chances of getting a guaranteed contract, even if he's not drafted. All right, I want to talk about a potential matchup of JT Toppin, who is one of my new favorite prospects. I actually did my big board 3.0. I released it on Friday, and he was one of the new names that entered. And I've actually heard from a very reliable source that there is a team that has him in their top 40. It's unknown whether or not that is enough to make him stay in the draft or whatever. But he has a potential matchup against PJ Hall. What are your thoughts about New Mexico and Clemson?
That's one of the games I'm most excited for,
Mhm.
and ironically enough, New Mexico is favored in that game. They're favored against the 6 seeded Clemson as an 11 seed. Uh, the matchup between those two is interesting because Toppin is one of those guys who's athletic but strength deficient
Yep.
because he's youthful. And PJ Hall, some of his best games are against teams that are bigger because then he stretches the floor and he shows those appeal that the appeal as a
Hmm.
3 point threat. But I think this is the game where he uses, hey, I'm a senior, you're a youngster, I'm going to take you to the rack. So the key to me in this game as to who wins, but also as prospects, is if Toppin can stay out of foul trouble, because his length can influence PJ Hall. But I think PJ Hall's going to use
Put
his
that shoulder
girth.
into him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
use his girth, create some contact. Ian Shefflin's a monster on the glass, so that's where the game's won to me. If Toppin can stay out of foul trouble, I think the guards of New Mexico are better than Clemson, and they can control tempo. But Toppin will have a chance to improve his stock should they win this game because he's playing against PJ Hall. I don't think PJ Hall really has much to improve because his tape's there. Like it's 4 years of it.
I think shooting. I know he shot like 38% from three last year, and the numbers went down this year with an increased volume. I think he finished at like 31% from three, something like that. And so I think that for him, I think shooting is going to be very important for him to prove that he can make shots in the pre-draft process. because if he can have a strong tournament where, or at least a strong game or two where he shoots efficiently from three, I think, that's a good last impression for him. But for a guy that is probably going to really, for a guy that I think his role in the NBA is going to be a pick and pop floor spacer, the 31% shooting from three is a little bit, makes me a little hesitant in the sense. But I like PJ Hall. At one point in the season, I had him early 30s. Now I think he probably can go in the 40s, but I think it's just all going to depend on the jump shot.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment. I think his jump shot is good touch wise, but it's not moving enough for me to outrun kind of 4 years of film where he's been good, but he's been more athletic than some of those guys. And I think in the NBA, he loses that athletic advantage. So his jump shot has to be that much better.
Yep. I agree 100%. Well, that wraps up this episode of the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast. It is NCAA tournament time, and that is why Leif Thulin is the guy that I rely on when it comes to anything college basketball related. Once again, it's Rafael Barlowe with Leif Thulin, and we are out. But stay tuned for the next episode with Leif. He is going to break down his top NBA prospects coming out of the West region. So that's an episode you don't want to miss. Once again, it's Rafael and Leif, and we are out.